Okay. Sorry, thank you.
Most of us as nurses and healthcare workers pretty well know what implicit or unconscious bias is, but let me say the definition so we're all on the same page. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. They're unconscious. It's not something we can consciously think about. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control, unless we decide that we're going to work on these. They are explicit biases are when we have prejudices and bigotry and things like that. But these rest underneath our conscience. They reside deep in the subconscious. They're different from known biases that individuals may choose. Rather, implicit biases are typically not accessible through introspection. Typically. But once you get trainings like that, you'll start to recognize them. And I'll talk about some of that as I get always wrong. Another thing I want to say before we go to this next little exercise is that notice that they're both favorable and unfavorable. Implicit biases, they're learned from our experiences and mostly in our childhood and upbringing, but they also are protective factors that keep us from like walking down a dark alley at night or going into a biker bar by ourselves, I mean, there are implicit biases that have a protect our ability to interact and take care of our patients and just interact with the people we know. So I'm going to show you some pictures. Okay, and as I do this, I don't want you to dwell on them. I'm not going to give you time really, but I want you to just think about what's the first reaction you get to these pictures. Okay, what comes to mind immediately? And you don't have to, we don't have time for you to respond. I just want you to kind of think about it. So we have a biracial couple, some Muslim ladies, a same-sex couple with a baby, a very wealthy family. And so you all probably have maybe some thoughts about them, but what this is, how do they view you? How do they view you as a nurse? How do they view you as a Christian woman, as a church member? Let's look at some more. It's my teenage page. How do our teenagers view you? How do your teenage patients view you? And what's really going on in this picture on the right? Is she mad because they're telling her she can't do anything? Has she been bad? I mean, we just don't know, okay? I love that one. And how do these folks view you? Chances are most of these folks are unchurched, very unchurched. Okay, maybe not, but probably. I mean, as we try and interact with them, how do our biases against them affect our witness? How do their attitudes toward the church affect the witness and their ability to hear Christ at all? And then here's some quote unquote good pictures, the good people. There we are. So so unconscious bias, as you can see, it's in everything that we do. And what happens with unconscious bias is that now mental models are everywhere. What they are, they're established by past events, experiences, media, and other messages that we receive. And they serve going forward as filters through which we observe, interpret, and respond to our world. They shape what we see and hear, and they also shape what we feel and what we believe and what we do. They are a part of unconscious bias. They exist below our awareness. They are how we perceive the world works, and they determine how we act. And they can interfere with learning. They can interfere with interaction completely. and they're everywhere, and they're at home, they're at work, they're at church, they're out in the world, they're everywhere. And so we're going to do this to show you how they. I want you all, don't write these down. I want you to stare at and think about these above here. Just think about these I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 seconds. Don't write those words down, just think about them. Okay, now I hope you have a piece of paper. So I should have told you to have that. I'm sorry. All right. Write down all you remember. Okay, time's up. How many people wrote the word sleep? Anybody want to raise their hand? Oops. It's not on the list. Oh shoot, I don't know where my mouse is. Did anybody write the word sleep? No? I gave you too much time. Good job. Usually there's something. Nobody's written the word sleep? A lot of times people will write the word sleep. It's not on the list, but because all those other words are on the list that remind you of sleep, usually sleep hits the list. Let's do another exercise. Take your sheet of paper, okay, and I'm going to say a word, and I want you're going to have to chat after this. I want you to just draw a tiny little picture, you can draw a big picture, but just nothing intricate that kind of describes what you think about when you hear this word. Okay, you ready? Love. Religion. Divorce. Concupiscence. Okay, so unmute you guys and talk to me. Tell me what you all drew when you heard the word love.
Family.
A heart. Anybody else draw anything besides a heart? Nope. Okay. How about religion? A cross. Anybody draw anything else besides a cross? That are you talking? Anybody draw anything besides a cross?
No.
What might a Muslim person draw?
A mat.
A mat? What might an atheist person draw? We don't know, do we? Maybe. Or a Jewish person. What we think of in our mental model of religion may be different from the people we encounter, and may not. Same thing with love. We could think of some things that someone who maybe hasn't had some love experience, they may draw something else when they hear love. Okay, how about divorce? What did you all draw for divorce? Someone drew an X. What else? I'm sorry, say it again.
Lightning bolt.
A lightning bolt.
Sad face.
A sad face.
A broken heart.
A broken heart. I've had conferences where they draw balloons because they were happy to get out of the relationship, I guess. You know, so even divorce. Okay, what did you want? What did you all draw for concupiscence? Anybody draw a question mark?
Three.
I couldn't understand the word.
Concupiscence, it's a real word. Actually, it's in the old King James. I learned from a pastor actually when I was doing this training with pastors. It was in First Thessalonians or Second Thessalonians, but it means an abnormal obsession with sex. And so and it actually was used in old King James. I had no idea. When my training, when I got this, they just tried to find a word that no one would know the meaning of, because it's important to know that you can't have an accurate mental model of what you don't know. Something, but you're usually inaccurate. Just like if we thought about with religion, what someone who is an atheist or a Muslim might draw. We can assume what they might draw, but we can't have an accurate mental model of that. And letting go of our mental models allows us to listen to one another and cultivate new ideas. So I'm going to show you all my training with mental models basically came with studying about the economic classes of poverty, middle class, wealth, and how they interact with each other, and how through that you can help people work their way out of poverty. And that's a whole training itself. But I want to show you some accurate mental models of, because you can do this with church or school, with BNF. I mean, we can look at accurate mental models so that we can learn to work together. But this is an accurate mental model of poverty. And when we look at middle class and wealth, they'll also have similar things, but they'll mean differently. So all poverty, people in poverty, and every community in poverty will not look exactly like this. I might add that this is also pretty much American or westernized world. This is poverty in America. America does not have abject poverty. Countries where there is abject poverty, it's a little different. We think we have abject poverty, but we don't, because we have governmental assistance. And when you go to places like Haiti, Honduras, most of Africa, there's not that the people in poverty don't have governmental assistance. And so this looks a little different for America. We have a lot of generational poverty, but we don't have abject poverty. So entertainment is very important to them. What's agency time is how much time they spend in social services and things like that. Everybody has children, but their child care looks different. Friends and family are very important. They are in every class. Okay, criminal justice system is looked on differently in with people in poverty. Safety, debt is big. Mental health and chemical dependency, which will show up in every mental model. Healthcare may look a little differently. They're going to use public healthcare systems and clinics and things like that, free clinics more than you would see in middle class and especially wealth. Clothing is different. Housing is different. Schools, their attitude towards school is different sometimes, not always. I have to generalize so we can get through this, but realize that we don't want to stereotype, so it'll hit most, but not all. Police, most people in poverty look on police a little bit differently than people in middle class and wealth. They have a lot more fear of police usually. They see police more than middle class and wealth, unless you're a policeman, which tend to be people from middle class because they are middle class because they're working. Okay. Religious organizations, their attitude toward religious organizations, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, is more of needing assistance and help, and they need some assistance, and so their attitude toward religion and religious organizations may be different than ours, people in middle class. Social services is where people in middle class work, some agency time that we see with people in poverty. And then businesses, you're more likely to see pawn shops, liquor stores, corner stores, rent to own, laundromats, fast food. You don't see, check cashing, temp services, used car lots, especially buy here, pay here, lots of dollar stores, transportation. Is it on here? Yeah, transportation is an issue in poverty, and so this is done by AHA Processes, who is the people who do Bridges Out of Poverty, the program. And this is pretty much an accurate mental model of poverty. It doesn't definitely show up in all communities, but if you put all communities together, this is what you can accurately think will happen. And you could probably understand that. Childcare, they don't go to daycare centers. They usually have a grandma or someone else take care of them. And do people not work in poverty? Absolutely, do people in poverty work. Okay, there's more to poverty than just not having money. But they make minimum wage. They may have 2 or 3 jobs, but because of situations in life, they're still in poverty. So it's really important. I think people in other classes have an attitude that people in poverty just, how many times you heard somebody say, they'll just go get a job, they'd be okay. Well, that's an inaccurate model. Most people in poverty have more than one job, okay? Or, does that mean that there aren't people in poverty who don't work? Absolutely. But you'll find there's someone in the group that's working. They've got to have money to survive. Entertainment's very important to them, and they put a lot of value in that. You all can probably tell stories. I can tell stories of where maybe people got, a person in poverty may have gotten something. I've heard of, people who have won the lottery and they've gotten a large amount of money and it's gone within a year because they spent it on, large screen TV and a big vacation. They didn't pay off any of their bills. It's just, it's a situation. Any comments on that?
Benita, I see people getting their tax returns, the lower class, and it goes to anything but to help them live the rest of the year. It's sad.
It's because they live in what's called the tyranny of, most people in poverty live in what's called the tyranny of the moment. They can't see future. They have to depend on each other, so entertainment becomes very important to them, and so what they value is different. So when we're caring for someone like that or trying to interact with them at church, it can get really confusing when most of us are middle class. And so, and just understanding kind of their attitude. I'll quickly tell a story that when I was in training, they told, which happened years ago. This originally was created for education systems and helping people in education deal with children who were in poverty. And so that they could assist and help them see a better future. They talked about it it was in Southeast Ohio, a family that was very poor, and they were from the mountains, either West Virginia or Kentucky. And so and they didn't have a refrigerator. They were living with just out of a cooler. And the kids went to school, they valued education, and they were really worried about that. And so the school teachers, they loved this family, got together and bought them a refrigerator. And they had it delivered like on a Friday. Well, the next week, Monday through Friday, the kids weren't in school. And so the following Monday, they came back to school, and the teacher said, "Where have you been?" To one of the teachers said, "Where have you been?" They said, "Well, we've been home visiting our granny." And they said, "Well, you have?" And they're like, "Yeah, because you gave us that refrigerator, we were able to sell it so we'd have enough money to go home to the hills because our granny's dying and we wanted to see her and spend time with her before she passed away." So they took that refrigerator they bought and immediately sold it so they could go do what was priority to them. And so, and you know, all of us may just be like totally appalled, but that's our mental model compared to theirs. So let's look at, most of us are middle class. Some of us have probably lived in poverty, but we're mostly middle class or so. So middle class has a lot of the same stuff. There's things that show up in middle class that don't show up in poverty: mortgage payments, maybe higher education, careers, hobbies, and interests. Our children are more into sports. We use daycare centers. We're in civic clubs. Mental health and chemical dependency shows up. Does this credit card debt, does that mean people in poverty don't have credit card debt? Sure. Religion, like I said earlier, police, schools, social services, and religious organizations have a different, we have a different vision of them. You won't, you know, we have restaurants and bars. You don't see very many Starbucks in a poverty community. You don't see a lot of banks and people who in our lower income communities. Not many fitness centers. I don't think we'll see a Planet Fitness in our or veterinary clinic, bookstores. I mean, and when we look at poverty, a lot of their businesses, when you think of pawn shop, especially like buy here, pay here lots and rent to own, check cashing services, they're really there to exploit the poor. And so because they can cause massive interest that we would never, because of our credit score, probably not really need to take advantage of. You're not going to find golf courses in middle class. Middle class is all about achievement and making sure we succeed, making sure we're the best that we can be, that our children can be the best that we can be. And there's none of this, there's nothing wrong with this. This is just factual. This isn't slurring anybody. This is just what it is. We save for retirement. And that's not going to show up in the culture of poverty. And it's just how it is. The other thing I'll tell you about us is that in any group of any size, or a group of groups that are together, the dominant group always makes the rules. Okay. For instance, how many of you are left-handed? Anybody left-handed in here? Pam is. I don't know if there's any more. Usually I'll have 1 or 2 or 3 left-handers, but the majority of us are right-handed people. And left-handed people can probably tell us how many times. I mean, you know, the water fountain's right-handed, the scissors are right-handed, mouses are right-handed for your computer. We could go on and on about what's right-handed that left-handed people have to adjust for. Pam, can you attest to that? But yes, I mean, when I'm in a classroom setting, my left-handed people go on and on of all the things that have to be adjusted by a left-hander, because the dominant amount of people in this world are right-handed, so most everything works for right-handed. Another thing that I'll tell you that's even closer to home for us is that, you know, I know in Kentucky, depending on the poll, approximately 11 on a Sunday morning, that's giving all religions, okay? So that means 85 to 89 of them % are out doing whatever they want. They're not in church. And we in church get so frustrated that there's ball games on, you know, our kids are in ball games and tournaments, and they've got practices on Wednesday night, and if they don't show up, they don't get to play. You know, they'll get penalized. They can't play at the next game or whatever. But see, when 85% or more of the people in the world are not in church, then it's not important to them. Church isn't important to them because they're the dominant group of people in that case. They make the rules. And you'll think about that through anything in our lives, okay? So when it comes to middle class and poverty, the people in middle class the middle class is shrinking, but we're still the quote unquote dominant class. And I don't mean that dominant like we hold it over other people. There's the most people are middle class people in that realm of middle class. And so middle class makes the rules. When it comes to forms in school or at the bank or at the hospital, when they've got to fill out forms, It's a middle class language. It's a middle class, and some people in poverty are threatened by that. They're threatened by teachers and people who they don't quite understand. And when they have to fill all these forms at the hospital or wherever, it's overwhelming to them in many cases. And so they won't fill them out or whatever because they just they don't feel like they're adequate to do that. But we make the rules about a lot of stuff, and then we just expect people in poverty just to jump on board and understand everything we're doing. A quick look at wealth applies to the wealthiest 1% of households in the United States. Wealthy people are all about connections. They always have the best. It's important to them. They have everything. They pretty much have the middle class model too, for the most part. But they're more important about board of directors and their properties, and their vacations aren't down for me down to Gatlinburg over to your most closest resort. They're going to Europe and all other places, and everything they do is making sure they have a connection so that they stay where they are or even get farther up the chain. That's all we need to say about them. So what happens when we think about these middle models? What happens when your middle model differs from the middle model of the person you're working with, witnessing to, caring for? So we have expectations, predictions, and decisions. And what really happens when we interact with folks may be totally off board, okay? And so we're just not on the same page. But if we just, then everything breaks down. And so it's important for us to become conscious of our attitudes toward things. They don't need to change. They're just what they are, just realizing that other people have different middle models, have different unconscious biases. And middle models, unconscious bias leads to hidden rules. Hidden rules are the unspoken cues and habits of a group. The hidden rules come from the environment in which one was raised in our lives or are living in. They're easily broken because they're hidden. If we think about church, just real fun, it can get funny in a way. How many people when they come to church? I mean, what if that one girl, or somebody told me it was a boy, and those pictures that are earlier with the rainbow hair and the tattoos and the piercings, he walked into your church, or she, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. How would you be able to dress them with people in your, it's a hidden rule that at least you clean up a little bit to go to church. Or what if the homeless man walked in? Okay. And so they've broken a hidden rule. How many people, when they come to church, have their own pew? Do we know where people are because they're sitting in their very pew? And you wouldn't sit there because, well, that's Benita's pew, or we can't sit there, that's Benita's pew. And do we know when to stand up and sit down? Or do we know that we're not supposed to talk during the prayer? I mean, we have all kinds of hidden rules in our life. At work, you have to, if there's a hidden rule, it's not written anywhere that you need to be on time, that you need to do your work and you don't leave until you have to. But what if a person of poverty comes in and they come in 2 hours late because they couldn't get a ride, or they had a kid that had something? I mean, we've all been frustrated about hidden rules. A person will learn the rules of survival for his or her environment. The big problem with hidden rules is that they're seldom or never articulated, but more importantly, they're equated with intelligence. What do we think when someone breaks a rule? The first thing, and I know this is sinful, so don't hear me wrong. The first thing we think is they're stupid. How can they not know? They're so stupid. But what if we never told them what the rule is? And why do we expect people in the healthcare setting, in the hospital setting, if we're about to be in a bunch of us are going to Standing Rock Reservation where we don't know the hidden rules at all of the Native American culture or what their mental models are. I mean, what happens when we interact with them when we have our agenda for what things could happen and they have theirs? Okay, so it becomes a problem. People who break the hidden rules get the look. like, the wheel's still spinning, but the hamster's dead, or the look at some look of, they're so stupid, but they're not. They're just, they don't know. We criticize the rules of other classes, cultures, or groups because those rules are used for survival. And so you have to be really careful when you realize that you're about to, if you're criticizing somebody for something, think about why you think it's wrong. But hidden rules do help people navigate difficult situations and relationships that are more respectful and productive. When we know the hidden rules, when we're able to share our hidden rules, we're going to increase relationship and we're going to increase our ability to interact with each other. Working through my notes, I'm sorry. And also acknowledging hidden rules helps us understand our own behaviors and values better. We don't have, there's so many hidden rules, and I'm close to running, I'm getting where I'm going to run out of time, but I have put some on here as related to the class. Let me look at these. So like possessions, people in poverty, their biggest possessions are people. They value other things, but because they can't have a lot of things, they value each other. They need each other to get places, to help with childcare, to help them survive. Middle class, it's things. We all like things. How many things? How many things? I was driving around the other day thinking about every time I turn around, they're building more storage buildings. Those, I mean, I guess because everybody has so much stuff that they need a storage building to put all their stuff in, and there's enough that people can keep building more storage buildings. Those people who make those storage places, and it's just crazy. Middle class loves things. Wealth, of course, their possessions are they can get anything they want, but they really like the legacies, the pedigrees. How long new money is totally different than old money, and they love one of kind of. You would never go into a house of that 1% of wealth and say, "Oh, that looks like a Picasso." Well, of course it's a Picasso, because they would never ever have a painting that would be nothing but original, and because they're about making sure they have the best of the best. Time and poverty, the present is most important. They live in the tyranny of the moment. They don't see the future. When you talk to people about, we've talked a lot about that when we take care of patients. Stop smoking because you want to be here for your children or your grandchildren. Well, they can't see past this week. So telling them to stop smoking so they'll be here 10 years from now is not effective, okay? Because they're based on the moment, that they live for the moment. Middle class, future is the most important. Decisions are made against future ramifications. We do this for our children because we want to make sure they go to college, or at least they get in the trade school so that they can be successful and that kind of thing. So the future for all of us, and most of us can admit that, we save for retirement because we're looking for the future. Wealth, traditions and history are most important. That's why new money, even though it may be as much as theirs, gets shunned. Decisions are made partially based on tradition with them. They're harder to understand, I think, than poverty. Poverty, key question for food is, did you have enough? Quantity is important. We do that a lot with church. They always want to make sure we're raised with parents who maybe lived in depression. You didn't leave my mama's house after she made enough food for me, and you had to go home with a bag, or a dish or something. Middle class is, did you like it? Quality is important. And then in wealth, it's is presentation? Is presentation important? I don't have time to tell you a funny story with our instructor when her husband was involved with some people that were wealthy, and she took, just, you can carry on from this. They went to this mansion and the butler answered the door, and she brought a casserole to the dinner. Just in like a 13 saw that casserole again, because that just wasn't their thing. Language, I want to spend a couple of minutes on this. Poverty, it's casual register. Language is about survival. Middle class and wealth is formal register. It's about negotiation. Let's look at language because it's important. Formal language is straight. There's a beginning and an end. Casual language is very circular. We have experienced people with casual language. When you're into formal language, it's very frustrating. So here's some examples. Casual language, what's up? Compared to how are you doing? And a casual register, my bad. You might say, it was my fault. Please excuse me. I accept responsibility for my grievous error. Apologize for my faux pas. And casual registers usually got a lot of noise and body language and nonverbal cues. So instead of a groan, in formal language, we might say, I made a mistake, or you can read the rest of those. I feel uncomfortable. Now, does that mean we don't use to a doctor and I messed up? I wouldn't just groan. I probably wouldn't get very far, okay? Or a patient, we use formal register in business. But if I'm in poverty or and I never use formal language, then how am I going to know to do this, or even just say, you can use casual register at home. And schools will do this now. You can use casual register at home, but not in the classroom, because they want them to learn that out in the real world, you've got to have formal language. Okay, so it's got a beginning and end. Casual, it's up and down and all over the place. I went to ER, who had his leg was hurt really bad, and so the nurse started interviewing, and he said, and his sister was with him, and she said, I'll tell the story. Because for casual language, you got using one or more people. She said, well, we were having a party. And we were going to we were gonna make hamburgers and everything, but Billy and Joe were out working on the car, and I told them they shouldn't have jacked that car up. I told them they weren't supposed to get under that car with that lousy little jack. They wouldn't listen to me, and then we needed to get something to drink, and so we went out and they were going in and out under that car. But how? And the nurse says, well, how did he hurt his leg? Well, I'm getting to that. So we went out there because we ran out of soft drinks or beer, and we had to go get beer, but how are we going to get there? Because they had the car up on the jack, but Sarah said she'd drive, and so we had to get money from them, and so we went back inside to let everybody know that we were getting, well, how did they hurt their leg? I'm getting to that. So we went to get soft drinks, and so we were gone about 10 minutes. They were still working on the car when we got back, and we went back in, but how did he hurt his leg? Well, then we heard this big crash and we went in, and Billy's underneath the car, and the car had fallen on him. That's casual. How many of us have had those experiences where you're just like, well, that's really great, but what do you need? Anyway, and so, and then a formal would say, my brother and I were working on the car, we shouldn't have used the jack we used, and I got under the car, the jack fell, and the car hurt my leg. And then we came to the hospital. That's a formal register. But casual register is a whole lot different. There's a lot of storytelling, and as we all have experienced, it gets pretty tedious. But if I disrespect their story, and I disrespect them and cut them off, am I going to gain their trust and respect? What if they're, and that happens when we're witnessing, when we're engaging with people with church and work and even each other. We have to be really careful about breaking relationship because we get frustrated with that casual story. Let's look at hidden rules of church for just a few minutes. I want to talk about the fact that AHA Processes did this, and so it's all churches of all denominations. I'm going to let you pretty well read that. I'll pick out some highlights. Giving for poverty, it's because Jesus is their friend. They usually give cash disproportionately to their income, meaning they usually give more than what they can afford. Middle class often tithes and gives a check or cash. But ministers in a lot of churches that are completely in poverty have they can't afford a pastor that's had formal education. He's usually bivocational. He has been called by God. Middle class churches have at least some theological training, usually some, and often, I mean, I live in a middle class church, and my pastor is getting his doctorate, so they also feel the need to serve, and they receive a salary from the church. And then high level churches tend to have a high with lots of wealthy people. The pastor is highly educated, salaried from the church, but also receives money from book sales and endeavors, and very involved in denomination. Mission work usually is local with people in poverty. Is that bad? No, as long as we're out telling people about Jesus, we could probably learn from them. A formally adopted, middle class, we tend to go, we may do at home, but we will also go away to do it. The people in wealth feel that's, too very wealthy. And we're talking the top 1%. They'll give money, but they're not going to dirty their hands. Now, is there exceptions to every rule? Yes. Social events, eating, quality of food is important that we talked about. But often in middle class churches, and I live in that kind of church, the main dish is often provided by the church. We'll say, we're providing the meat and the drinks, y'all bring everything else, okay? And then musical instruments provided by individuals who are interested in music. Music is selected on emotion. Sometimes they use recorded music or guitar, maybe have a piano player that may or may not have very much talent. Music activities are overseen usually in middle class church by an individual or individuals who have musical training. And music selection is more structured. Purpose for coming. I thought this was really good from AHA processes. The main purpose for all is to receive spiritual rejuvenation. That's the reason we go to church, is the experiencing God. But people in poverty also come for relief and support. They need some time. They also need support from their church. And Jesus told us we'll always have the poor among us, and we've got to take care of them. The middle class come for a sense of well-being and to provide a positive role model for children and really for the community. And a lot of people in wealth come to make connections, okay, because they want to be seen. All right, that's enough to kind of explode your brain. So let me finish up with this. Well, first of all, before I do that, does anyone have any comments or questions? Hearing none. I know it's a lot to process, and I've talked really fast, and so you can use my slides in my to look through this again. Again, this is very generalized for the purpose of the training, and realizing that all people are individual and may or may not have these characteristics. So the question is, can conscious bias be controlled? Unconscious bias. I mean, it's unconscious, right? How are we supposed to know we have it? And it used to be, researchers long believed that because it was unconscious or implicit, there was no way to change it, okay? That it was virtually impervious to change, and that went on forever. But about 10 or 15 years ago, I was trying to guess, no more than 20, researchers began to realize that when we start talking about it, we start recognizing our implicit biases, when we start realizing our unconscious attitudes and beliefs, we can at least start curbing their effects on our behavior. We can recognize them, and we can make changes, or we can't change them. We can still change the story of how we interact with others. So how do you do that? So strategies to address unconscious bias. First of all, be aware of individual perceptions, stereotypes, and hidden rules, both yours and everyone else's, and their impact on decision making. So when you're thinking about, okay, here's my attitude about that, is that the same as the person that I'm talking to? Be aware that that's groups. I'll never forget, I was in Swaziland, now called Eswatini, and I was teaching a whole week of health. And on the one day we were talking about mental health, and we did a game because I talked to them about you had to have fun and have something that brings you joy in your life. So I had a beach ball, and they're like, no, it wasn't in Swaziland. It was in Malawi. In Malawi, I had a beach ball in their language, Chichewa. I had written questions on them. So I would toss the ball in the room and and they had to answer the question, what was your favorite food? What was your favorite Bible verse? The problem was, I just assumed they could all read. And that was, I just assumed they could all read. I knew they couldn't read English, but over half of them couldn't even read their own language. They were from way out in the country. And I felt awful about that. I never asked about that. I mean, we changed within the first, we did the class 4 times a day. We changed the first class, but that was an implicit bias of mine, a mental model of them. I mean, I was so proud of myself for putting that on their ball in their language. I didn't even ask if they couldn't read, if they could read. And then, so we ended up, verbally doing this if they had read or whatever, but it was embarrassing to think that I'd done that. But learn about your cultures and the groups that you encounter. Don't ever assume anything. Ask people their story. If you start having negative judgments about somebody, start saying, tell me what's going on with you. How do you do this at home, or and have a conversation. Just don't assume anything. Recognize that diversity is real, dynamic, and legitimate. And remember that you may be thought of as diverse to the people you encounter. When we think about diverse populations, okay, diversity is a big buzzword these days in our culture. When you think about people who are diverse, just realize they think you're diverse too, and that you're different. And so be aware of that. When we're more conscious of what's going on, we're going to make better decisions. And engage in those courageous conversations to increase your knowledge and address negative perceptions, stereotypes, and types and attitudes. I have found so often that nobody ever turns me off. I mean, I'll ask them, so where are you from? What do you do? Do you go to church anywhere? And no one ever says, I don't want to talk to you. When you ask people to talk about themselves, they'll talk about themselves, and you learn so much. And this isn't new. This is not new. And I want to finish with this. Of course, Jesus ate with tax collectors and prostitutes and religious people. I mean, he had no implicit bias because he knew everything. Okay, he was all knowing. But Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 9:19, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, then I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. So Paul experienced unconscious bias, hidden rules, mental models, but he said, I'm going to get past all that because I want to be able to win these people to Christ. I want to show Christ in all I do. And that's what we need to do. And that's why it's so important that we realize what unconscious bias is, and then take it by the horns and deal with it. Here's the reading. This is the books I got this information from. And thank you. Does anyone I'm over a minute. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
So I heard something this week I thought was very interesting. You can go to the library, and it's in the Northwest somewhere, and rent a person. And when you're renting the person, it's to sit down and learn more about them. So you can rent somebody that's a Muslim, or you can rent somebody that's a different race, just a different culture. so you can learn more about them. And I thought, well, how cool is that? It's a structured environment. It's where you can just open up and listen. And like you said, Benita, you've asked them to talk and tell you, they're going to talk and tell you. But I thought that's pretty cool. That's one of the best ideas I've heard lately, because I feel like most of the time we don't want to hear people. And we do have just unconscious bias. We all do. When I see certain people, I can remember after 9/11, I rode an airplane, and I was on the airplane from Dallas to Las Vegas with Muslims, and the 9/11 had just happened, and they were nice people. That I shouldn't have let that bother me, but it did bother me. But it was me, not them. So yeah, this has been really good.
All right, well, we're done if you're done.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you so much.
Well, look, if you guys have anything any kind of education that you are interested in, reach out to Marilyn or myself or BNF in some way and let us know, so we can find instructors and people that would be willing to speak. Because we want it to be stuff that you're interested in and how it can better your life and your service for Christ. And remember, if you got on a little bit late, to put your name in the chat box for the CEs and give it 4 weeks. I'm hoping it don't take that long this time, but it will come. But if you don't get it, reach out to us. But thank you so much.